I'm very happy to introduce Steven Yano. I'm sorry, I'm not American and I don't have as much interaction with those kinds of names. I apologize to you, Steve Yano.
It's totally fine.
Now, you've been my friend for a while, to forgive me, but I still want to apologize about that. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the invite. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you're one of the people I truly appreciate to just stop by and talk to. You specifically in New York City, I have in the New York area, I have quite a few friends I just like to talk to. For example, Karen and you. And if I can get both of you in one stop, it's amazing for me. I get a lot of ideas and inspiration.
It's a particularly bad time for that, but maybe in the future.
One day, something to look forward to.
And maybe we'll all even meet together. I actually started planning that before everything happened, us and a few others, but still. So before we start, I want to share why I approached you about this. To start this sort of show corner on rhetoric and ideas and information. And it was because I sat with you for a beer with some friends, I think from Deloitte, and you shared your experience as a professor trying to do the same transition that Tommy has done to online and discovering some things. And one of the things you shared with me was, hey, how about the opposite? You know, what happens if you write a short story or some narrative around everybody working only online, everybody studying only online, and one day the internet goes down, they have to go to class, and they say, what's with all this space?
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, that was an idea that I kicked around about for a while, about the idea of what classrooms would be used for in the future. And I always had this image of these technicians coming in to put up a VM or to clean a server out. And they're like, what did they used to do at these places before there were servers? And I'd be like, well, you just shut up and do the job. Stop speculating. This always been this way. And it just kind of grew from that. But yeah, I think it's a good way of thinking about what's necessary and what's accidental to the teaching experience.
So what is important to the teaching experience around this? What do you think has been your kind of biggest takeaway?
Well, I don't know how many people are going to listen to or watch this, but I'll be totally honest. For me, it's been a total disaster shifting from the classroom online. It's the worst semester I've ever taught, the lowest quality for sure. The only class that's doing well is my class that was an online class to begin with. That one seems to be fine. But I think the biggest thing we have to think about is that space, connecting that physical space of desks and the whiteboard and the lectern with what's going on in terms of teaching has way too much influence over what we teach and what we think teaching is. And it's going to take a long time, and we have to start peeling back those layers of physical discipline, what attention looks like, what time for instruction looks like. All these things have to be reinvestigated, and pretty quickly, because I think a lot of universities are probably not going to be in person in the fall. It's starting to look like.
Yeah, it's not easy right now in the academic space, in any space really. So that's something we definitely need to think about. So on that note, you have prepared something for us today.
I did.
Well, I'm happy to just pass it over to you.
Okay.
Before I do that, I do want to give you some credit. I know it will embarrass you.
Oh, no, it's okay.
You have done a lot. So you're an associate professor of rhetoric at St. John's. We kind of went over that. But you also published in argumentation and advocacy, and in contemporary argumentation and debate. Debate is part of your life. You care a lot about this. You care about students learning stuff with it. And stuff is, by the way, a professional term. And you have blogs. I think you have 2 podcasts, Republic of Sophistan and In the Bin. And I think you also have all of this on your website, right? Sophist.nyc.
That's correct. Sophist.nyc is the kind of the place to find everything I'm doing. I have links there to everything in case people are curious.
Good. Well, I will say that I appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming on the show yet again.
Oh, it's very nice of you. I appreciate you too, Gotti.
There you go. And you will teach me how to say names.
Maybe it's not a foreign thing to get Yano like that. Americans do it all the time. They say, I've heard everything. Well, we can talk about that later.
I've seen MCs at events saying, oh, I hope I pronounced that right. So I try to reciprocate all I'm saying.
It's perfect. Anyway, good rhetorical form.
Back to you, and take it away. Thank you.
All right. There was a time when people felt pretty comfortable that they knew things, or at least They knew that the people who were supposed to know things actually knew them. But then something changed. Too much reliable information was available. The people who we thought knew things expressed unfamiliarity with new books, new publications, and ideas we had heard from other supposedly knowledgeable people. A crisis began to emerge. From the coffee shops to the university, the question ceaselessly appeared, how do you know? It didn't seem possible to really know anything for sure, since there was always something new. Now, this might sound like our contemporary world, but what I'm describing is early modern Europe, the 18th century. Technological advancements meant that books could be produced cheaper and easier, and they were more frequent, and they could be easier to obtain. They had a lower price. Prior to these innovations, the way you knew what knowledge was simply that you had to read all of the books on the subject. So, for example, there would be somewhere between 7 to 12 books on botany or surgery or poetry, and off you go to find them. The early version of Google was a wagon, a horse, or a ship. Let's go after our search terms. Let's find the information. After you're done, welcome to your new life as a lecturer. After all, you've not just read more than the students you'll teach, you've read more than anyone. The increase in books meant a lack of ability to read them all, seriously undercutting our understanding of knowledge. If books are coming out too frequently to be accessed and read, how can you be sure you know everything? Well, the panic of a world of unknown books upset the grounding for the valuation of information so much that new standards of what it meant to know had to be created. The solution was the German creation of the PhD and the rise of the modern research university. Now expertise was determined not by consuming all the books, but adding to the morass of books. If you can write a book that not only fits into the books out there on the subject, but expands the possibility of more books being created on the subject, you are indeed knowledgeable. You can speak for the field as opposed to as the field in the previous arrangement of knowledge. Chad Wellman's book, Organizing Enlightenment, argues that such moments in history, where the certainty of what good information is or can be, are generative of larger discussions about the anxieties of authority, rightness, and accuracy. They are not solved, and this is not how knowledge improves. He writes, specialized science or disciplinarity, emerged in an age of media surplus, not as a problem to be solved, but as a solution. The contemporary idea of an expert was not meant to investigate this issue further, but to ease anxiety by producing a new relationship to and with knowledge. Our solution is not veracity, but capacity. We can accept this arrangement as knowledge, good information, because it calms us down. Even in a well-structured world where we have science and the research university there to give us a sense of a known knowledge to lean on, we are still haunted by knowledge of our own incapacities in relation to knowledge. James Gleick, in his book, The Information, A History, A Theory of Flood, writes about our contemporary feeling as loss, where, quoting him, the anxiety is in terms of the gap between information and knowledge. A barrage of data so often fails to tell us what we need to know. Knowledge, in turn, does not guarantee enlightenment or wisdom. This gap that he's talking about is uncertainty, something that the great educational engines of the world are dedicated to eliminating. But it is never gone, no matter how much paper or how large the word counts go. This uncertainty is not accepted or celebrated because we do not or cannot accept that a valuable part of human life might be constituted through doubt. We can never really be sure, not even of that. The inability of people to accept or determine good information is sometimes called confirmation bias. It's a very popular term. I'm sure you've all heard it. The specter of confirmation bias haunts nearly every discussion about information these days, and it's one that, ironically, we think we understand. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, in his book Black Swan, gives one of the better accounts of the troubles of confirmation bias, that human beings are naturally geared towards looking for the information that matches with what they already believe they know about the world. Quoting Taleb, a logical mistake in reality, but not in the classroom. And that's his definition of it. That's a pretty good way of thinking about it. The way we teach the interpretation of information and the applicability of information for judgments works great when that's the only thing that we're assessing. But when there are no classroom rules, thinking in this way becomes difficult. Taleb is quite right that we often confuse absence of evidence for evidence of absence. And in a classroom, these things can be controlled as conditions of the test. But information is not pure. It's always known or missed through context. The classroom context is clean compared to the daily context. On top of this, confirmation bias might not be the biggest problem. Hugo Mercier in Dan Sperber's book, The Enigma of Reason, argues that confirmation bias is developed as a way of assisting human reason. Human reason, they theorize, exists to better human communication. Reason is, quoting them, biased because it overwhelmingly finds justifications and arguments that support the reasoner's point of view, lazy because reason makes little effort to assess the quality of the justifications and arguments it produces. Confirmation is termed by them the my-side bias, where reason is seen in terms of the speed and necessity of communication, where the best, most accessible reasons for doing something are located and presented. They also point out that most human communication happens in conversation, where the exchanges are quick and there's significant back and forth. As reasons that persuaded us initially fail because someone has pointed out that they're bad, we reach for the next most likely quick support, and on further on in the conversation we go. Research also indicates that we're much better at questioning reasons that are not our own, perhaps something that developed alongside the my-side bias to ensure that biased, lazy reasoning was not weak. As we exchange conversation, we eliminate insufficient reasons in favor of not true or real information, but contextually best information. Information forms out of reasons in conversational contexts because it is designed for conversation, communication, the things that humans have relied on more than anything to ensure success of the species. So what can we do with all this information I just presented you? What is suggested many times by Mercy and Sperber and their work is an activity from my own field, that of rhetoric. Have an old-fashioned debate where parties come up with the best case for their side possible and engage with one another using reasons, those things designed to sway, from the my-side bias and the epistemic vigilance we have as a feature of thought because we favor our own beliefs. Although information will never be good, it will also never be terrible unless we take it directly into the context of our thinking and make it our own in a very direct way and engage others with it. I always say to my students that truth is not the objective of research or inquiry, but the starting point of research and inquiry. This is because when we discover something we think is true or right or good, we are immediately compelled to go engage others with it. We want to tell the world, and luckily the world wants to question us and tell us to back down. This exchange is the root of finding good information and knowledge, the art of discourse, dialogue, or more simply, conversation, the root model of everything from basic human instruction to rigorous political argument. As we share our idea, we encounter things we haven't considered or can't consider if Mercy and Sperber are right. What we need to make sure is that we have the best grasp on the information is other people. That's the best way we can test our ideas. Practically, we need opportunities to practice. Our world does not give us that. We are meant to sit alone, read something on a screen, and determine if it's good information. Yet research indicates that a debate where both sides don't try to agree with each other, but try to disagree and bring out all the best reasons they can find for their side is an efficient way to locate the best information based upon the features, not bugs, of human reasoning. Instead of wishing for better equipment, let's use the equipment we have and be honest about how it works. This is not only a good line for a university professor who's often underfunded and undersupported, but great for all of us to recognize that information can't be good or bad without the context of human communication. The context that it creates, exposes, provides, and questions. Information is only good after it has been shared with others.
Thank you for that, Steve.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. I have a question for you, if you don't mind. You're talking about biases.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find, have you developed a sort of mechanism for yourself to try and detect these biases?
Well, I think that the problem with bias detection is that our world encourages us to find out that we're right and then go try to convert others instead of going out and engaging with others before we're absolutely certain about our ideas. And I think that we're kind of encouraged to determine that in isolation. And I think the research on bias and all these things seems to indicate that we, if you buy into evolutionary psychology and the research they're doing, that we have evolved to determine good information through interaction with others, through the shortness of a verbal exchange, of a conversation we're trying to make a decision. And that's where confirmation bias comes from, is I have to be very quick and get something out I think is persuasive to you, and then you have to be very vigilant to push it back. So for me, I'm always talking and asking questions with other people. And I think that conversational context is the most important for trying to find bias in information. Mm-hmm. Sitting alone, we don't really have the equipment to sit alone and evaluate something as unbiased. We have to talk about it with other people. And, you know, I don't know about social media for that. On one hand, it seems really good for that. On the other hand, it seems really inadequate. It just depends on, I guess, how you use it, like a lot of things.
You know, I've been thinking about bias a lot and putting this back into the framing of fake news. yes, this is important, and we need to try and figure out what we do about all of this. But I kind of accepted that if information comes to me online, it's entertainment. If I actually care for something, I go and research it and try to figure out what the heck is going on, you know? But
Do
I
you
can't,
also do this online?
well,
Me-
I'm a kind of a spammer on Facebook. I'm very active and I share things and because something makes me laugh, because I like the rhetoric, because I like the title, because I like how well they presented their ideas or anything of the sort. It doesn't necessarily present my own opinions, but what I find is that's how I use Facebook. That's how I use the internet. And some other people don't like it, but I haven't seen another solution than, I've seen concerns of people becoming dull to the truth. And I think a lot of people would not agree with me. I'm in the minority, but I find that becoming dull to the truth, it can be a useful thing. It can be something that guides me to accept things as entertainment and just take at face value that they're not true. And if I actually want to learn something, then I put in the effort. I don't think it's sustainable for anybody to go and Google and search and research things. Biases are real. And if you look to psychology, not a psychologist, a lot of disclaimers there, all these aspects, for example, in social psychology around social proof, reciprocation, all these keys of influence, as Robert Cialdini calls them, are useful to us. We can't make all the thousands of decisions we need to make all the time. It helps us act faster. It helps us interact in our world. And I don't want to lose that. So I'm just as a comment, I'm not sure if there is something for us to tell other people to do rather than just accept the situation, which is a little bit sad.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there with I mean, bias is obviously not a bad thing. It's very useful to have different biases. That's kind of how we construct how we move through the world. But biases become dangerous when you start to think of truth as something other than a process. If you look to all of the places where truth is determined to be vital, medicine, scientific research, or legal procedure, truth is an intricate process that takes years and years and years to study how to participate and get involved in that process. So when you think of truth as an object to be attained, that's dangerous.
Yeah, but the thing is, you're an expert in your field, right? And it's an unbearable complexity, even for experts in their field, to find out. Truth is too abstract for me right now.
Mm-hmm.
But if I want to study something that's in contention, for example, whatever reason, whether it should be or shouldn't be, not touching on the political aspect, global warming, okay? Mm-hmm. For me, there will be an unbearable complexity to try and learn anything about it. If I take something that's not in contention, let's assume body language, unbearable complexity to go through all the information and try to figure something out. So I don't really like the idea of Googling for things, but I do appreciate that we do continue to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Our basic assumptions could be, here is a basic, I collect basic assumptions that people just integrate. Malka was talking about some of these earlier, and it doesn't have to be something around gender or race. For example, there is this truth that managers should make their chair much, much larger than those people sitting in front of them. I don't know if it's true or not. I personally dislike that. But I found a source I think is the actual source from a book in 1910 that just wrote about it as a best practice. And everybody's been talking about it as if it's truth. There is the numbers around, I don't remember the precise numbers right now, but something like 50-something% body language, 30-something% tone of voice, and 7% only the actual words. I would like to see them teach your class with those kinds of numbers, where what happened was there were several researchers in the 50s and 60s. One of them was, if I pronounce his name right, Moravian. And in a lab environment, when he came out and said something along the lines of, "Hello, how are you?" or "Hello, how are you?" there is a major difference that the body language, the taste of the words come in. But when you teach math, not so much. Another one, and I'll stop there, is about 10% gays, right? That doesn't include the definition of what's gay. It assumes only one type of person, a little othering there. It doesn't assume bisexuality, but we kind of covered that. It doesn't assume a lot of things. And the pool the research came out from was, I think, I forget his name is running away from me right now, but he did the major research on sexuality in the 40s, if you remember the person. So it helped open the world to that kind of research, but everybody quotes constantly 10% gays, which is not true. So how information infiltrates us, even without biases, we don't have to have a bias to come to the wrong conclusion.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I think the idea of, I just like thinking of truth as a living thing, as a malleable thing. And it's something that's a wonderful thing that helps us make judgments. But the other beautiful thing about being human is that we can retract those judgments and make different ones. So I think that quest for the absolute solidity of truth is a dangerous one that I call it the enlightenment hangover, that things can be known and then we put them on the shelf. Think about it more like a house plant or an aquarium than a nice statue, and I think you'll have a better relationship to truth.
You know, when I was a bit younger, I used to be more controversial. I would share my opinions. I'm kidding, kind of, maybe. But what I learned is, even people who did not like me online, when they actually met me, gave me a chance, which I truly appreciated. And there is a quote that I'm not sure about myself, but I found invigorated some thoughts for me. And that was, the problem with prejudices, and I can't attribute it, and I might be misquoting it. The problem with prejudices is not that they exist, but that they are not the whole truth. It kind of rings for me as you're talking.
Yeah, it's sort of like that paring of it down to something very pragmatic and something I can politically use. Yeah, I mean, I think that's
right. Don't get me wrong. And just I found it energized me to think of the actual issues.
Mm-hmm.
I like that because it makes the point that prejudice is knowledge. It's just you know, and if you don't dig deeper, it's unclear to you how shallow that knowledge is. It's really more about accepting a very incomplete or poorly researched, you know, piece of knowledge and not identifying it as, you know, of as little substance as it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I think for people who are interested in going deeper on this, that Chad Wellman book I quoted is a fantastic case study of what happens when there are too many books for you to read them all in one lifetime. How can you say you know when that's the standard? And so the solution was to reduce anxiety about, do we really know anything, rather than to actually present, yes, we can know anything. I think that's a great way to think about our current condition too.
We have become also, as a society, and for good reason, I think we need to swing hard in the other direction. We've become careful, if not even weary of biases and buckets and putting people into buckets. That said, the way we psychologically work, not trying to excuse any bad behavior, you know, these help us. We need them to function day to day. And I love some of my biases. They help me make quick judgments. They help me, you know, make sure that I function in a way. And finding the line between those, or trying to gather information around the way I behave, is kind of the critical aspect of that for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like this question. I think these are questions from people watching about how do you keep up when things are buried under advertisement stuff. That might be a whole other thing I could talk about at some point. But you know, it's just it's tough because, you know, the internet's gone the way of books and the newspapers, and they've been commercially taken over. And in the early 90s, that's not what people thought was going to happen to the internet. So you have a lot of money playing in there as well. And that's a whole other thing I could talk about another time, is strategies for that. But that's a huge question. I think it's a very important question. I
think we would appreciate you doing that. Yeah. We can't really touch too much. We need to wrap this up.
Right.
But I do want to acknowledge the question. I'll read it out and we can talk about it for a minute, but then we'll wrap it and move over to Karen's reading. But I do want to mention, next week, we have a show with Cory Doctorow and some people, for example, other people as well. Steve Crocker, who is one of the founders of the internet, ARPANET, and quite a few security founders. A few of them even sold their companies for over $2 billion. And the reason I mentioned this is because they're going to touch on the culture of aspects, of the cultural aspect of things. How do you make these digital policies? How do they survive or act when they run into aspects such as these or challenges such as these? And the week after, more important than that, for this particular question, we have a show on so-called fake news, disinformation, misinformation, influence operations, information operations, whatever you want to call it. We're bringing in actual experts in the field, professionals in the field, to talk about it. So it's not the subject is not reduced as usual to admiring the problem and mentioning social networks or specific countries or specific political entities. So that might be a good show for the person to attend. The question is, and I'm not going to quote the name right now because we didn't ask for permission yet. Just write down in the chat if you're willing for us to do that. So the question is, Google's algorithm changes, and suddenly users of its search engine are at least momentarily on a tilting floor in a funhouse. Essence of Wonder and this event are buried in the middle of ads for skin cream. I wonder what type. How does an ordinary person keep up without an information to look out for weaponized narrative? So I think that's a big question. I just wanted to acknowledge it being asked, and we can get into that maybe on the weaponized narrative front in 2 weeks. With that said, I appreciate you coming on the show, Steve.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Absolutely. Would like to have you back.
Well, one day I will come back.
Sounds good to me.
Wonderful. Yeah, we had some follow-up questions for you.
Absolutely. On that note, I'm happy to pass it on to Karen